Hello, welcome to Elections Daily's UK Super Thursday, if you want to call it, election review. I am joined by Aaron, Mac, Harris, and Sarah, and we will, because of our technical difficulties that are on my end, not anyone else's, we will get straight to it. However, it did worse than even expected by some estimates, suffering the largest by-election swing against an opposition party in recorded memory, and of course led to criticism of Sir Keir Starmer, who is of course now in another controversy with this imminent reshuffle of the shadow cabinet that is alleged to be taking place this week or in the following weeks. So on that note, I'll go first to Aaron. Thoughts on the Hartlepool election?
Well, I mean, going into this, there was a lot of uncertainty. The Reform UK drop would be. We weren't sure, first of all, where they would go, because we knew that a lot of them came from Labour to begin with. So I think it was only really certainty over which way to go after the Salvation poll put it such drastically to the Conservatives, and that they improved on that with the actual result. We can't be sure the entirety of the factors. Also, there were a lot of people not voting, which does normally happen in by-elections. So I don't think it can be solely put on Starmer, which many people have suggested. I think that there's a multifaceted reasons, which include local factors.
Harris?
Yeah, I think it's confirmation after what happened in 2019 that Labour are in an existential crisis. We have a situation where, in general, there are sort of three ways you can conceivably go. You can try and reclaim that centre ground, which Boris Johnson has very much parked his tanks on. You can go to this sort of blue Labour, they call it, likes of Paul Embry, saying a more sort of socially conservative, working class roots Labour Party, or you can go back to the sort of far leftism of Jeremy Corbyn, and it's not clear exactly where they should go. I think in voters' minds, Boris Johnson is occupying the centre very well at the moment, and beyond that, I wouldn't want to be in the leadership of the Labour Party right now, because I think it's extremely difficult to make a plan interpreting these results.
Max? Max? Oh. Anyway, I think he's frozen. Oh. You're muted, Max. Okay, Sarah, while I think Max gets his audio microphone on.
Well, as a member of the Conservative Party, obviously I'm pretty happy with the results. I did think Conservatives were going to win. I was pretty confident that was going to happen by such a great margin. Of course, I think we discussed this on Thursday, and we said there was one prediction Labour would win, the other said Tories would win, but it wouldn't be by much.
Correct.
I just want to focus on the Northern Independence Party, which only got 150 votes, if I recall, and is getting mocked mercilessly on Twitter. But I think it's, again, very interesting and very much sets the tone for what politics is to come. If you look at the so-called Red War, which my constituency, Great Grimsby, is a part of, it's fascinating how it has changed so massively. And is it a result of Boris Johnson being popular and the Tories being popular? Or is it a result of Labour putting in a Remainer former MP as their candidate, which I thought seemed pretty short-sighted for a place that voted 70% Leave?
Yes, and this candidate, Dr. Paul Williams, has won criticism in many Labour circles for being selected in a seat that, as mentioned, voted 70% to Leave. Let's go to Max now. Hopefully this time his audio works. Max?
Yeah, I think I've got it working now. Hartlepool was really a perfect storm, I think, for the Conservatives, in that it was one of those seats where Reform or UKIP have been doing really well in the last 10 years or so, and that possibly maybe embellished the results slightly more than the media are perhaps being portrayed. There was also that independent candidate in there who got a solid 10% or 9%, I think, which I don't think anyone really saw coming. But I mean, nonetheless, it's not it's a really poor result for Labour, and everything has been said.
And of course, on that point, it was reported yesterday by the Times that Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, was sacked from her position as chair of the Labour Party, which is the elections wing of the Labour Party, and has now won a full-fledged criticism on Sir Keir Starmer's part for saying it was his fault for the defeat, to now looking like he is going to sack people and blame it on others. So I will let the panel discuss on this. What does Labour do next, and what does Sir Keir do next? Especially with now the expectations now that Labour has some trouble in the north. That it wasn't just the 2019 issue that is now passed on to this year. I'll let someone go first. Whoever wants to attack that law first.
Yeah, can I just talk about Angela Rayner first?
Yes.
There seems to be a lot of confusion about exactly what's gone on here. When I first saw this, I thought it was an extremely peculiar way to start off any potential reshuffle, because she's the deputy leader of the party and is elected to that position by the Labour membership. He has to deal with her anyway. Mm-hmm. So it seemed to me to be an extremely bizarre thing to sack her, as it was generally put in the media, but it seems that that's not exactly the case. And there seemed to have been several rumours throughout the day that Starmer was going to go for a full-fledged reshuffle. They don't really seem to have come to fruition, to my understanding. And at the moment, it screams to me a very similar situation to what happened with one of Theresa May's last reshuffles when she was Prime Minister, where she was sacking people, moving people, and people were basically just refusing to be sacked. And she came out of it with less authority than she went into it. So it seems very confusing at the moment on that front.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, in that situation, it was Jeremy Hunt refused to move out of out of health, and Justine Greening didn't want to go out of education either, which didn't help her at all with the post-mortem of that. Anyone? I'll let go Aaron next.
Okay, so I kind of want to actually build up on what Harrison said. I think what he said was pretty accurate. I mean, the reshuffle was rumored as soon as Hartlepool result came out, and you know the reason why apparently Angela Rayner has been sacked from her role is because she was the campaign coordinator, and clearly from as we were going to go into, the campaign was a drastic failure. So if you're going to make changes and you're going to stay in the leadership, which obviously, I mean, Starmer's going to sack himself after one local election, right? Especially due to this forecast of COVID boost for most of the parties, the governing parties, I should say. So, what he tried to do is he's looked at the campaign was a failure, changed the people who coordinated the campaign. Now, apparently, there have been reports this has been an insane failure within the party. In fact, Rayner is almost trying to make Starmer sack some of his aides in the leader's office. And potentially, they were supposed to be meeting last night, and Rayner ended up going to the pub instead, which I think says everything about Starmer's authority. Because, you know, if you're looking at the Labour Party just on in the outset, you don't really understand the extent of the divisions within it. And Starmer right now, especially after sacking Rebecca Long-Bailey and not giving Jeremy Corbyn back his membership in the parliamentary party, within the very left of the party, he's on very thin ice. And Angela Rayner being a prominent member of that. And in fact, the Shadow Chancellor being a prominent member of that, who's rumoured to have been sacked, it could spring a civil war. And let's be honest, he's not going to win that war, because after this result, his authority is drastically weakened.
Yes, and it should be noted the Shadow Chancellor Anastasia Dobbs, who is of the party's more left, is rumoured to be sacked by someone of Labour right, Rachel Reeves, who has won criticism from certain sectors of the Labour left for comments she made back in 2013, when she said she would beat George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the time, on cutting benefits. Max.
Yeah, well, I really think Labour are in a really difficult position because they've got to balance their progressive base, their progressive activists, with who really engaged with Corbyn in 2017 and have stuck with him ever since. But they've also got to balance the fact that they're being beaten soundly by a pretty right wing party, and their northern working class base is certainly no longer aligning with them on social issues. So it's really going to be a case of trying to find the right policies to satisfy the activists. I think they'd be worth looking back at Corbyn's manifesto to some extent, because there were a few policies in there which I think would probably go down well, but didn't really gain the traction because Corbyn was ultimately a poor messenger and steamrolled by Get Brexit Done from the Conservatives. Um, Having said that, I think Starmer needs to be careful not to be too progressive. I don't think there's any danger of that because he's not instinctively of that nature. But he also can't go sacking off all the, like, I mean, they're rumoring Lisa Nandy was going. Angela Rayner has been sacked. They've got to be careful not to alienate the whole left wing of the party.
And it should be noted, Nandy is of the soft left and very much still has supporters who think she is a future Labour leader down the road. Sarah, you live in a type of seat that Labour used to hold on to, the red wall, and now is swung heavily away from them. What would you think Labour is, what they have to do? Same question I've asked the other three panelists.
Well, my seat was one of the biggest Leave voters in the country. I think it was the 10th biggest. It was 72%, mainly because a lot of people are peeved over our former fishing industry, which made Grimsby very strong economically, which many blame the EU and their fishery policies on. So, I think Labour backing Remain was a very poor idea. Our former Labour MP did. Our actual current Conservative Leah did vote for Remain, but has now backed Brexit. But I think it's hard to predict patterns within parties. Look at, say, the Republican Party in the US, or even the Democrats. Bill Clinton, it went the third way, then it became sort of more moderate under Obama and Biden, but still has a very strong left wing with AOC. Republicans have gone from Reaganism to neoconservatism to new populism. I think it's hard to say what Labour should do next because it is essentially down to the base and the voters to see what they want. I do think they should certainly embrace Brexit more, but I think would they necessarily need to do that now that Brexit is basically a done deal? Mm-hmm. In the same way, I think that's why people are going back to Lib Dems, because it's less about Brexit and more about being credible opposition on centre and left of centre.
So you would say mostly that Labour, as some columnists would say, is that they need to basically understand the new alignment that British politics has been, not the traditional left-right axis, but more of that levelling up as the Conservatives have mostly done on their end. Yes, and of course, as mentioned in the private chat, but I'll say it publicly, yes, this reshuffle is very due imminent. It may happen this week, and depending on what that reshuffle does, Keir Starmer could either strengthen his position or weaken it, which is already in a very critical state because of how poorly Labour did across the board. However, speaking of poor Labour results, we go to the one place that they did very well in, and moving on, and that is Wales, the Senedd, where the Welsh Labour Party was expected to lose seats, but it actually defied polls and actually held on and gained one more seat. The current coalition with the Lib Dems would, in fact, have a majority. The Lib Dems did lose their assembly seat, but gained a seat on the list, hence keeping their thing, which, of course, for Labour, this was one of the better results on a rather grim night, or multiple nights, across the UK. So I'll first go off to Max. Thoughts on the Welsh election?
Wales was a very good example of, the vaccine bounce. I think the Conservatives in England, it was more than just the vaccine bounce which saw them doing well. However, in Wales, I mean, I don't think the Welsh government have done anything particularly transformative recently, but Mark Redford has essentially been competent in administering the vaccines. He's got the highest rates of vaccinations in the UK. I also think that, I mean, in a contrast to England, they not all of the UKIP vote, which died this year, went straight to Conservatives. The Labour managed to win back some of those votes, which were typically working class in the past. So I think, I mean, given where they were in the polls beforehand, and I think this is incredibly a successful result for Labour.
Aaron?
Well, I think some people have, stated this as a shocking result. And on the surface, looking at the 2019 general election, you may assume so, but I'm not really shocked, and I'll tell you why. It's because if you look at the history of the Senedd elections, every other election, the Welsh Labour Party get 30 seats, and it happened again this time. The biggest shock is the collapse of the Plaid Cymru vote, because Plaid Cymru last time, they took Rhondda, they were making a lot of progress, but apparently if the country isn't in that position to really go for it. So that's potentially why they've lost. Now, the Conservatives, I mean, the Conservatives, this is a good election for the Conservatives in Wales because this is their highest tally ever, their highest vote share. They took the Vale of Clwyd. They're hoping to take a few other, what will be classed as the Welsh Red Wall in the North seats like Wrexham, which they did in 2019. But, there was a COVID boost in the vote, especially in Wales. Though some of the decisions by Wales have been controversial, especially that circuit break, which they introduced. But generally, I think that this is just a standard Welsh election in terms of the Welsh Labour. Just looking back at the history, I don't think there's anything special to note.
Harrison? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got some inkling in Wales when the result for the Vale of Clwyd came out. Of course, the Conservatives took the seat, but I was expecting a larger margin there that they might be doing all right off the back of the UKIP vote. What really shocked me the most in this election, and I think Max may have mentioned it, is what happened to Plaid, particularly in South Wales. This was a seminal election for them in the sense that I think it's the first one where they have tried to put some discussion of independence or more greater autonomy, the Welsh culture, front and centre of their election campaign. And so people forget that in the second Scottish parliamentary election, the Scottish nationalists lost seats. So the question for Plaid is, do they make this like 2003, or is this a symptom of a little bit more decline? And as far as it's of course a lot smaller at the moment in Wales, but as far as the nationalist unionist divide goes, I think that those who favour greater integration with the United Kingdom have done well. Abolished the Welsh Assembly, didn't win any seats, but they forced the Conservatives to abandon their long-term project of getting into coalition with Plaid and promise no more power to the Welsh Assembly.
That is indeed true. I cut you off, Harrison. You were going to say something. I
wouldn't have expected that at the beginning of the election campaign a few weeks ago.
Yes, it's very interesting to see the position Plaid Cymru takes because they had a very disappointing result. Their former leader, Leanne Wood, lost her seat to Labour rather badly, and now they have to decide what's the next path. And yes, it should be noted the Welsh Conservatives did do very well for the, in the history of the 20 years that 22 years that the Senedd has been around. Their best result. Just that is unfortunately for them, it was also a good night in the traditional sense, as Aaron mentioned, for Labour. Sarah.
I believe that's what I said in the chat on Thursday, that I still think Wales has a long way to go before being considered a good place for the Conservatives, which I do think, has shown. There is still, they may have voted Brexit, but there's still a long way to go for the Conservatives to win trust in Wales. Maybe not as much as Scotland. Scotland seems to be sort of shifting very, very, very slowly, but Wales, I don't believe will. I am surprised Mark Drayford got a huge majority, but again, that's probably down to the people I follow hate him. So I thought that was very interesting, and that did show quite a mandate, not for just the Labour Party, but for him personally. Leanne Wood, the former Plaid leader, lost her seat and apparently had a huff and stormed out. Whether that's true, there's been no video, but that is sort of very interesting. And I do believe there is much, much less appetite for independence in Wales than Scotland. And I think it may have been a mistake for Plaid Cymru to push that angle, if that's something they will learn for the next time. But we also had to factor in that's kind of the point of them, in a similar way to the SNP, is the point of them is independence.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and it should be noted, of course, that Mark Drayford did do very well and increased his majority. So I think the question now becomes, because of how badly the rest of Labour did elsewhere and not Wales, is there a chance that Drayford could have a very large influence over what maybe Labour decides to do in terms of trying to fix itself, or whoever runs the Welsh Labour elections office deciding they may get, given something in London to try to fix the operation around, since they were one of the few areas of Labour's campaign that did very well. Aaron, you had your mic turned off first, so I'm going to let you go and answer the question.
Absolutely not at all. Welsh Labour has dominated Wales since ever. I mean, Wales has had a majority amount of seats Labour since the 1920s, I think.
Yes.
So and the fact is that within the last 11 years, we've had Labour outside of government and in all but one times losing seats, and they haven't gone to the Welsh Labour, even though in between that, twice they've held on to their plurality of seats. So I see anyone going to a regional party looking for election advice, especially because the people in Westminster have such large egos, as you would have to be in that position, to where there is just absolutely no chance.
Anyone, Harris?
Yeah, of the three people, sort of old, rugged-looking men who were elected to lead the Labour Party across Great Britain during their post-Miliband leftist era, Richard Leonard in Scotland was absolutely hopeless. Jeremy Corbyn had his journey, and for Mark Drayford to come out of the other side is, I think, quite impressive, although I suspect a product of the coronavirus bounce that incumbent government seemed to receive across the UK. But he is still very much on the left of the party. He beat out Vaughan Gething, the health secretary, I believe, in Wales, yes, in the leadership election. So I'm not sure that Starmer's going to want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But having said that, someone's led that campaign. Somebody's said the right things during that campaign, and it might be worth a phone call or two.
Indeed. Max?
Sorry, I dropped out there. What was the question?
Oh, yeah, my apologies for not realizing that. Yes, the question was, because of how well Welsh Labour did, should someone in Westminster be giving calls to Cardiff about election advice, or hiring people to maybe try to change face of Labour as well, since Welsh Labour has been the only successful Labour Party grouping in the last decade?
Well, I would say they'd definitely be foolish not to analyse the results in Wales and to talk to the Welsh Labour Party and find out what they did that was different in England. I mean, Harrison's right in this with the COVID bounce. Drayford definitely benefited from that, but I mean, their campaign must have been doing something correct, because they're an incumbent government which often struggle in other parts of the UK, and therefore they definitely need to have a look at what was going on there.
Sarah?
I think they should keep Mark Drayford in Wales. I think, like you said, you have to have an incredible ego to go into Westminster politics. I know that they're trying to get Andy Burnham possibly from Manchester again, but I think, he's good there. He seems popular. He did well in the elections. I just think it would seem a little foolish if Welsh Labour want to continue to build, then they realistically should keep him. I don't see why. And he might be absolutely rubbish in national politics. You never know. Just because someone's successful in one area doesn't mean they're necessarily good in the other. Mm-hmm. So I think he should stay put if Labour wants to continue doing well. Maybe he can offer advice, etc. But Wales is very different to national politics, to English, to Scottish politics. It's all very different for Labour, and it's hard to say, oh, that person's done well in one region, let's get them for everywhere.
It's also worth saying that it's often said about Welsh Labour in comparison to their English and their Scottish even counterparts that they are very much more sort of Welsh patriotic entity. And I think this is one of the themes that it's important to pick up on for the Labour Party in some of these red wall areas, is this idea of patriotism inextricably linked to Brexit. I think is something that Labour are going to have to tackle. So if that's been part of the product of Welsh Labour's success, a more patriotic campaign, they may want to listen to that. But the flip side of that is, I think, Drakeford will want to focus very much on being the First Minister of Wales, not saving Keir Starmer's bacon, I think.
Indeed, and it's probably a job he can probably have as long as he doesn't screw up, probably till he wants to retire. Before we move on to Scotland, we've had news come through because the Shadow Cabinet reshuffle seems to have started today. That is that Lisa Nandy will not be moved from her position as Shadow Foreign Sec. She will remain there. Before we go to Scotland, any quick thoughts on that move?
That would be ridiculous.
Well, apparently the chief whip has been sacked, though. It's just come out that there's been reports that he has been sacked. It's not officially confirmed, but that is apparently within the whispers of Westminster.
Yeah, he's been one of the top names mentioned in the rumour mill about who's been part of this campaign against Starmer and his inner team. So you never want to be in a place, government or opposition, where your chief whip is disagreeing with your leadership. That's a parliamentary nightmare.
Yes, and it should be noted that Mr. Brown here is a long-time experienced chief whip, having done this back in the Blair and Brown years as well, and been around for some long time. Sarah and then Max?
I have nothing to say about Lisa Nandy about her weird obsession with towns during the Labour Sheep Leader contest, which became a very beloved meme on political Twitter, which tells you all you need to know about political Twitter and what they find amusing.
Very nice, Sarah. Max?
I think it would have been madness to sack Lisa Nandy. I think she's one of Labour is somewhat lacking in characters and leaders, but I do think she is. Maybe she's not a future leader, but she's definitely someone who they need in the fold.
Or we will if there are any more news, which I expect will happen, we will cut to that as well, because reshuffles happening during a live show is always fun. Moving on to the fun land known as Scotland, that also had elections, which the SNP, and in its usual sense, made about many things. The SNP fell one seat short of a majority. On the other hand, the other parties, the Scottish Conservatives, remained where they were, losing some constituency seats, but in the process taking some list seats, which kept them where they were. Scottish Labour lost 2 seats, though they may have their biggest win may have been holding on to Jackie Bailey's seat of Dumbarton, which probably, according to the figures we now have, almost certainly stopped the SNP from gaining a majority. The other parties, the Scottish Greens, did very well. They did not get double digits, as most polling thought, but they still gained a pair of seats from their 6 to 8, which is an improvement. Meanwhile, the Scottish Lib Dems lost 1 seat. And it should be noted, Alba, for all the lovely hot takes about Alex Salmond's return to political politics, did not gain a single seat on the list. So first, rapid thoughts, Scotland. I'll go first to Harrison.
Well, I don't know why a lot of people on mainstream media have been saying, this election proves Scotland split down the middle. Where have they been for the last 2-3 years? There doesn't seem to be a way out here. To think that Nicola Sturgeon is claiming a mandate for a second independence referendum, despite the Unionist parties winning 38,000 more votes than nationalist parties, is something that I think the Conservatives particularly need to double down on very soon. And what seems to be quite worrying in the aftermath of this is kind of what I'm thinking about now, is that we could see things going to court. We don't really do big political court cases in the UK. It's a shame in my view, because I love the US Supreme Court and all of the important political issues that get decided there. But we don't do it. We're not used to it, and it could be pretty cataclysmic.
Apologies on that. It's never good to drink a soda while someone's talking.
So I probably elongated my sentence a little. I should have clocked that you had a little drink.
Yes, but no, that's very indeed. The SNP says it will go to court, try to force down a referendum. In their minds, there's an independence majority, though, of course, many legal scholars of the UK have been quick to point out that they really wouldn't win their case in court because of the Scottish rules, which say that only Westminster can grant any referendum. Aaron, thoughts on this the Scottish election?
Well, I mean, look, Nicola Sturgeon gained one seat, which is, I mean, probably still not enough to get a majority, though there is now a pro independence majority seats-wise within Hollywood. I think that, well, let's start off with the Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem, and Green Party narrative. Now, Conservatives are going to be very happy because Douglas Ross came under a lot of criticism, especially whilst the night was going on over losing, but he made up for it with list seats. I think Labour are going to be slightly disappointed that they lost a couple of seats, especially, losing a few list seats to the Green Party. They're in kind of, you could argue, direct position in terms of the union, well, actually not unionist, but the very left demographics. Sorry, the words got escaped me. But generally, I think the Lib Dems will be pretty happy with, which is a direct contrast to Wales, where they lost their only first past were made up in the list. But they were able to keep their 4 first past the post seats, and generally didn't really have any expectations to do better than they did. I think that on the question of independence, I think it's actually going to be very difficult for Boris Johnson to say no to this, because the margins between Nicola Sturgeon voting-wise and general people wanted to leave in supporting parties was around the same margin as Boris Johnson got, and the pro-leave for Brexit got in 2019. And they're both using very similar phrasing of arguments. So I think he's going to try to double down. And there was a conversation between the two apparently today where they emphasized the importance of set that all aside and just focus on the recovery for the moment, which is positive, but it's just going to delay the inevitable fighting between the two. If I'm going to be honest, now I am a unionist, but I do think there should probably be an independence referendum, because I do not think that the SNP or Scotland is going to stop talking about this until they're granted one because of Brexit. Latest polls are put in that unionists are winning the argument. Obviously, they're just polls, but I think that really nice if Boris Johnson or any of them want to have a degree of success again, you should probably grant one. I don't think it's going to be too unpopular in England, because, I mean, David Cameron, and he then won a majority.
Max?
Yeah, I think this result, I mean, it's a good result for the SNP. They've been at pains to point out that it's very difficult to get a full-on majority in in the system in which they elect their representatives. And I have to agree with them. It's a good result. Actually, it's also a really good result for the Conservatives. They were widely projected to lose seats, and yet they have held them. And yeah, Labour, I don't think they were actually too concerned about this campaign. They were, because I mean they just got rid of the car crash that was Richard Leonard, and they brought in Anas Sarwar, who I think is a positive development for the party. He led a relatively good campaign, and I think they're hopeful that they can in time for the next Scottish elections. Also Greens, I'm sure they'll be happy with their two gains. In terms of independence, it's gonna go away until after the summer, I imagine, because the SNP would be stupid to not focus on recovery at this point. And I think if they didn't, that would really damage their credibility. But when it does return, I think I anticipate a referendum happening, because unless there's a sudden drop in independent support, they are going to be split, and the issue's not going to go away. At some point, the Conservatives or whoever's in government by that stage will have to realise that the only way of resolving this is through a referendum. At this point, I don't think we can really say which way it's going to go, because there's a whole campaign ahead, and there's a lot of difficult questions that the SNP have to answer. And yet, I mean, we saw with Brexit, there were a lot of difficult questions for Leave, and yet they didn't really matter in the end. So I think there will be a referendum in the end, and I don't know how it's going to go.
Sarah?
Did anyone remember them saying this would be a once-in-a-lifetime referendum? Because that really seems to have slipped everyone's mind. 100% if Remain had won in 2016 in the Brexit referendum, there wouldn't have been another one. And that's all I've got to say on it. I mean, it's the Scottish people's choice. You know, as an English person, it's not up to me as much as I'd like to preserve the union. But it said once in a lifetime. What is a lifetime exactly? There's no definition of it. And I think, they shouldn't be banging on about that while COVID's happening. And I think it's really positive that Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson said they want to focus on recovery. And I think that's great that they've come together to decide this. But I'm still just wondering, what once in a generation, was that something they said just to shut them up, or did they genuinely mean it? Mm-hmm. That's just all I've got to say on that. Cause
I can't like to come in on that. But firstly, I've absolutely no ideological skin in the game here. I don't even believe the government should exist. I'm all off the political spectrum completely. But I mean, at heart, there's something emotional about the union for me. But it's the rampant hypocrisy of all this stuff. Is I think that this will focus minds in Westminster. And I think there is a prevailing view among the top brass of the Conservative Party that since the Scotland Act of 1998, that every single government has suggested that the way to stop nationalism stone dead, as Donald Dewar, the first First Minister of Scotland, said, is to just concede to the nationalists, and that's got to stop. And the precedent I think it sets to say, Scotland's divided, you have to have a referendum, is that, you can choose to ignore the very clear will, 55% on an 89% turnout of the Scottish people. But if you shout loud enough, and if you cause enough of a fuss, we'll keep giving you another one until you get the answer that you want. And I think that's come to an end. And the people in Whitehall need to keep calm on this. It's easy to make rash decisions, but I wouldn't be shocked to see in the next year or two a small something that says to Nicola Sturgeon, know your place a little bit, perhaps changing the electoral system through the Scotland Act. They'll certainly deny any Section 30 request that comes through. And as far as these lawsuits are concerned, I think that it would be wise for people in the British government to completely stay out of it. Michael Gove's already said we're not suing anybody. And I think what they should do is let the SNP pass their illegal referendum bill after they've had a Section 30 request turned down. And what they'll need to do as a result of that is ministers will need to instruct civil servants to break the law. They will need to request that people from local councils in Scotland, most of which are led by unionists, send out ballot papers for an independence referendum, and they will say no. And what's the Scottish government going to do then when their referendum's in tatters? They'll have to sue someone. The British government should lay off a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised to see something in the next few years.
Of course, I should note that the nationalists will argue that Brexit was a change, but that, of course, is their argument. I'm just trying to be an objective host here. But it is, I think, very dangerous, I think, for the Union, very much where this is heading, that the nationalists very much seem to be very intent on having a referendum at all costs, even if it means destroying the structural integrity of Scotland in the process, because as noted with other countries when they've had these issues, it's not very pleasant. One only needs to look at Spain and how Catalonia ended on that front, or the divisiveness of a second referendum, Quebec in 95, when independence came within a whisker of happening and nearly destroyed the unity of Quebecers. So I think, as the panelists have said, it's a very complex thing. So I will ask, where do you all see the end game with this? I know Harrison gave his view of what he thinks the end game is. Does anyone else have a view on the end game with this possible inevitable request that the Scottish government sends to London for an independence referendum?
Well, here's the thing, is that, well, Harrison first was suggested a change in the electoral system, which I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason I don't think that's going to happen is because the Conservatives are fully committed to first past the post. The only way for them to rid the SNP of power within Scotland in Holyrood would be to remove that. And that's, the Conservatives will never do that, because then the argument from other people will be, well, you only have first past the post when it suits you. There's no way they'd change the electoral system. But the end game is solely, if for the Conservatives or whoever, any unionist, is what you have to do is you have to take out the SNP in Scotland, which is at the moment proving to be one of the most difficult things, because they have an incredible grip on Scotland, partly because Scotland is a left-leaning country. They don't really trust Labour anymore, and what party is going to? I mean, the Conservatives, to try and garner support, talked about broadband for everyone, which was in the Labour manifesto in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So you can the only route that's, red Tories, if you, or blue collar Tories, but I don't see in the near future SNP going, because let's be honest, as soon as the SNP get a majority, which is highly possible, even though the system isn't supposed to allow for it, then they're going to call for an independence referendum again. Because I think, I know he's not an expert on everything, but Jordan Peterson, I think, said it right when he said a referendum is a terrible way to decide policy, because no one knows when the mood is shifted. And it's really can't measure it. Because as much as we talk about polling, it's not always accurate, as we've seen today, this election with the Mayor of London. So there is no end game until Scotland leaves. That unless you take out the SNP, there's no end game until Scotland leaves.
Anyone have any final thoughts on that before we move on from this? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll just hop in there, and I'm going to say there's so many kind of different paths here, and there's been a lot of alternative ways that this could play out that have been laid out here, and I think they're all possible. I think it's really, really difficult to say how this is going to end, but the point I really wanted to make, it was kind of beyond Scotland, in that if Scotland leaves, I believe that will be the death of the union. Because as someone from Northern Ireland, I know a lot of people who would say if Scotland goes, we should go, this isn't working for us. Everyone knows that the Conservatives don't really care about Northern Ireland. The Boris Johnson's approval ratings here are something like -70. It's like atrocious, and it's really, especially if Scotland does okay, and like maybe they've been out for 2 years and it's not a disaster. I would fully expect Northern Ireland to follow. I don't know where Wales stands. They're kind of a bit further behind the whole independence process. But I'm going to say if Scotland goes, that will be the death of the Union.
If Boris Johnson is on -70, then it's nice to see there's something that can bring Unionists and Republicans together.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the one thing which everyone agrees on.
Yes.
Progress.
Yes, unity in the awkward shapes and forms. It seems that's the new rule of British politics: tribes uniting to hate someone for one certain reason. Anyway, I think we've exhausted our time on this, so we move on to the mayorships, which are always fun to analyze. We'll start off in London, where Sadiq Khan did win re-election. However, he underperformed very badly compared to what polling had him on. He did win still, by a respectable margin, but very much down from what polling had him winning in the 60s or the high 50s to about 11-point win. Sean Bailey, of course, did about a point and a half, like 1.9, I believe, better than Zach Goldsmith, but did improve in a lot of areas of the capital. And the Tories did decently well in the Assembly, albeit they didn't really dent much, but they stopped Labour from getting an overall majority on the Assembly. I'll let Sarah go first on this.
Imagine if the Conservatives had actually run a decent candidate and had pushed more into it, because I think they weren't behind Sean Bailey, because I thought, look, Sadiq Khan's going to win. We might as well push it. But I did see a very interesting point from a girl I went to university with who's Labour, and she lives in London. She said, we've got to remember that Boris Johnson was mayor of London not long ago. There was a Conservative mayor in recent history. You cannot say the same for places like Manchester and Liverpool, which, as I said last time, Israel-Palestine will get solved before Liverpool goes blue. I do think that if we'd had someone better in London, would we have won? I think it's difficult to say, but we very much could have. I think Sean Bailey wasn't the right candidate. There were too many gaffes. He didn't seem to click well with London. He had the backstory of being a black boy from a working class background, how he'd seen his friends killed by knife crime, how he was helping youths, and I think that is a great sort of story, but it just didn't particularly work.
Mm-hmm.
I believe everyone but Labour, Tories and Greens lost their deposit, which is very interesting. Obviously, the vote was split on the minor candidates like Lawrence Fox and Count Binface. Nico, yeah. I mean, there was an absolutely beautiful array of, everybody running in London. But Sadiq Khan's mandate wasn't as firm as he and probably his party would have liked, which surprised me. I thought it would have been a lot of an easier victory for him. Going to the second round was a surprise, having it be that close. But I think if the Conservatives run a better candidate, there would have been a better chance. But, Sadiq Khan's got another so many years in. Whether he will, I don't know if mayors are term limited, are they? I'm not entirely sure. But yes, so that's how it went.
And he could run for Parliament whenever the next election is held.
Well, he was an MP before, so
could always do what the previous mayor of London did, decide to hop back into politics.
Exactly.
It ended up well for him. It should be also noted in London, the Greens did very well as well across the board for their assembly and the mayorship, respectively, numbers. Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, Piers Corbyn was one of those candidates. You might know his far more moderate brother Jeremy, who led the Labour Party for a few years. What I'm sort of interested to think about from this perspective, as Sarah said, absolutely. I mean, there was talk just a few months ago of replacing Sean Bailey with Sajid Javid, who's an MP near where I live in Bromsgrove. Used to be the Chancellor. They really weren't behind him. I suppose the question going forward is, of course, there was low turnout. People like Binface, Lawrence Fox, Nico, as he prefers, I think. did take a lot of votes away. But does this mean that the Conservatives can be somewhat optimistic that they can win in London again with a man who's not called Boris Johnson, or a woman who's not called Boris Johnson? Mm-hmm. And I don't know, jury's out on that. I'd like to see a little bit more information. But this is, I think, more than anything, a catastrophe for the credentials for a future political career of Sadiq Khan. An election that you are destined to win. It's a coronation rather than an election. Going up against the worst Conservative candidate there for quite some time. I think for him, it's a blow.
Yes, and he hasn't probably gotten the success of a certain other mayor we will touch later down the segment up north. Aaron.
Well, I think I have a unique insight here because I'm the only one from this from near London. I'm from Hertfordshire, so literally I'm the seat above North London. So I can tell you that Sadiq Khan is very, very unpopular. And this, I have friends from all reaching areas of the political spectrum, from massive socialists to hardline, conservatives and people in the middle, and people just non-political. And most of them hate Khan. Right? So I think that Khan was so weak going into this election, and the polls had him so massively ahead. It makes you question, where are they polling in London? Because I mean, on first preference, Sean Bailey took two regions that not even the Conservatives in the Assembly took. So clearly there's a massive disparity between the hatred of Khan and everything else. Though I think looking at the London Assembly, Labour probably had a very disappointing night, being 4% down and losing a seat in the regional list. But I think Khan, if he stands, because he could go back to Parliament, he was in the front bench during his parliamentary career, then I think his popularity has probably taken a massive shot as a result of being London Mayor. I'll have to tell. But I think if he stands next time in London, I can see him losing very easily, because people just don't like him. One of my friends, who's not a Tory, said that she's genuinely considering leaving London because she just hates him that much. So that's where we're at.
And it will be interesting to see who the Conservatives try to push as their next candidate. Do they try to go with someone local? Or do they try to go with some big name outsider, across the board? That remains to be seen who they roll with, though it does seem that probably the next pick will probably come from some liberal Tory background, probably have a persuasion to win over some of those voters in London who may not be as open to a Boris Johnson party, but open to a liberal. Max?
It wasn't the worst result in the world for Labour. I mean, they only dropped, I think, a couple of percent from last time, with Sadiq Khan, who has been under attack pretty much non-stop for 5 years. But at the same time, I mean, they were running against Sean Bailey, who did run a really, really poor campaign. I think the Conservatives probably, if Khan runs again, they probably do have a shot if they get the right candidate. But I don't think Khan will run again. He'll probably see what's happened here and go, or at least Labour will see what's happened here and probably encourage him to step down. I'd imagine they could get him back into Parliament. He does seem more like the type for Parliament as opposed to a mayorship. Because he doesn't seem to be quite like the advocate for London in the same way that Boris Johnson was. Like, I mean, you may not like Boris Johnson. I don't like Boris Johnson, but I can honestly say that as a mayor, he was a great advocate for London, doing the publicity stunts and getting London on the map. So whereas Khan's not been that guy, he's just been under fire for 5 years. As further down the ballot, Greens did well. I lived I mean, they are in a shocking state in London right now. Their polling was actually half okay. It looked like they were going to get over 10%, and they just collapsed there. Really enjoyed Nicola Milana beating Lawrence Fox. That was a highlight for me. Other than that, that's all I got to say.
Always
Just
fun.
on
Now we. Oh, sorry.
Just on that point about mayors in general, which Khan might have some difficulty with compared to Boris, at least after his first 2 years, is that it's said about Ben Houston up in Tees Valley and Andy Street in the West Midlands that they have been able to harness the fact that we're from the same party as the government. We know the guys in the government. And also those people in the government are absolutely obsessed with you guys never voting Labour again. So elect me for the perceived positive benefits of that. And Khan, again, the Labour Party is looking increasingly irrelevant at this moment. And even in London, where it is Labour's heartland at the moment, shockingly, as Sarah saying earlier, hell will freeze over before Liverpool goes blue. Well, almost certainly is the case, but definitely could have said that about Hartlepool 10 years ago. So they're looking irrelevant, and so it's quite difficult for Khan to really properly harness anything other than just saying, I don't like Boris very much.
And speaking of Andy Street, that's where we move on to our next mayoralship race, which is that is that Andy Street beat Liam Bryan, who is more infamously known as the Labour MP, who decided to write a lovely, fun little note to his replacement when the coalition arrived, in which Labour has never forgotten where that note has been used numerous times in fun election campaigns. But to the point, Andy Street won a very comfortable victory compared to a narrow win that he had 4 years prior, to the point where he did very well, even in areas the Tories do not necessarily win historically in the West Midlands. Harrison, I'll go to you. I believe you said you're in the region because I believe Sajid Javid is in that region of the world.
Yeah. So there are two West Midlands regions. There's the sort of government statistical region which we used to elect MEPs out of, which I'm in, and then there's the West Midlands, which is Andy Street's territory. I don't think Bromsgrove is quite in it, but it is Birmingham City, Wolverhampton, Stourport, Stourbridge, places like that, which are black country, which is sort of far more industrial, post-industrial now anyway. Again, yet another damning indictment of the Labour Party among some of its former voters. I suppose what he had that Ben Houston didn't so much was the fact that Birmingham, the city, is still very much a Labour heartland, which counts against him. I don't really have much to say about it. It was kind of quite predicted. It was quite clear that Andy Street was probably going to win again. He's generally quite popular in the region. On Liam Byrne, I think it can be argued, won David Cameron a majority in 2015. We are talking about very fine margins in that election, and David Cameron went very heavy in swing seats. With a copy of that note, dear Chief Secretary, I'm sorry, there's no money left. It's an absolutely shocking thing to do. He's probably quite tired at the time, but nonetheless, can be credited with that at least.
And it should be noted, as Ad had mentioned here on Thursday's show, that it was meant to be a joke, but unfortunately for Liam Bryan, it's become something that's been an albatross across his neck for probably the rest of his political career, as well as his lovely tenure as a Home Office minister, which has been criticized in later years for Home Office investigation. But anyway, moving on to Aaron.
Sorry, mate, I've been looking because the full list of the new shadow cabinet is out.
We'll be getting there very shortly.
I know, but I can't remember what the question was.
Oh, my apologies. I'm terribly sorry on that front. We're talking about the West Midlands mayoral election.
Yes. Okay. So the West Midlands. I mean, beginning it was a shock that he won the first time. He's come in with an increased vote share, 1% of a majority. This goes along with the new Teesside, not new, but the Teesside mayor, who also had a spanking increase, though he did pass the first preference threshold. So, I mean, the West Midlands traditionally is Labour. You think of Coventry, Birmingham, West Bromwich, Wolverhampton, all these places which are traditionally solid Labour, and he's doing fantastic there. You know, what else can you say other than, you know, this is partly damning on Labour, and very, you know, quite a bit on Andy Street specifically, because if you look at the interview, he's not stuck to being a conservative, right? He's broken now into different bounds and tried to work with the local community, which I think is absolutely fantastic to see, and may, with his personality within the region, perhaps maybe he may look to branch out and actually take in Parliament. That element remains to be seen, but I think, you know, he could bring a big boost to the region for Conservatives, much in the way the Teesside mayor may end up doing as well, and possibly did do in Hartlepool.
I want to say that Sarah mentioned earlier the sort of the meme that was Lisa Nandy's obsession with towns, but West Midlands mayor is ground zero for towns for the Labour Party. It's places like Dudley. Dudley is just the epicenter of all this. I love Dudley, but that's a place where you go, Old Market Town, and you go up to people and say, "I've voted Labour my whole life," but it's places like this where we constantly feel let down. And Brexit, I think, is, rather than being the specific catalyst, it's the icing on the cake. This has been fermenting for a long time. Same story up in Scotland. The Labour Party really need to get this together if they're going to remain relevant in the future British politics.
And it should be noted with Street, of course, he's, as mentioned by Aaron, he proclaims himself as a one nation Tory, very much this kind, compassionate Tory who has put big emphasis on infrastructure projects in the region and trying to basically get stuff done with parties, the Labour Party, the Liberals, and all the other different groups, which has done him well. And it will be interesting to see if, come the next general election, whether Tories in the West Midlands may offer him a good seat to run in because of how successful he's been and because of the Boris Johnson example. Again, mayorships to Parliament seems to not be a bad investment these days. Sarah, you look like you wanted to say something.
First of all, I've heard from so many people who've met Andy Street that he's a really nice guy, so I think that comes across. He seems like, you know, someone you would sit and chat with if he came up to you. But I do think one thing I think we should factor in, which I don't think many people pick up on, is the fact that Andy Street is openly gay. Now, if you look at Birmingham, if you look at how it was the epicenter for anger against LGBT sex education in schools, I think that's kind of a positive thing about our voting system. You know, I'm not one of those people that believes in, you know, we should celebrate just because it's a ethnic minority, a woman, or gay. But I do think it's sort of it's fascinating, really, how we can have such diverse opinions on it. But I just think it doesn't matter that he's gay. He would have the same sort of attitude. He seems very competent. Infrastructure, which I think is incredibly important considering how rubbish trains are in the UK, and I think it's not a surprise he did as well as he did. I think it's actually a shame that he didn't win on the first round alone, but I think it's really positive for the region. If he's so popular and doing well, then that's great for everybody who lives there, because Birmingham's the second city, and that area, it's kind of a grey zone between the north and the south. We commonly joke that the Midlands exist because no one wants to claim Birmingham. But if he wants to make Birmingham and those regions proud, then I think it's really good. Again, I think he's the right man for the job. I don't think he would have had anyone more. I think someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg would not have done well in that area at all. He's great in his Somerset rural area, but not fair. And I think, you know, the point's made that more liberal Tories may do well in cities. I wouldn't call myself a liberal Tory. I'd say I'm much more conservative, but I think, you know, they've done well in how they're picking who, and, you know, good to Andy Street. I don't want to see him in major politics. I want to continue seeing him in regional, because I think that's where he thrives, and same with Mark Drakeford.
Max?
I think pretty much all that's been said, really, it shows he is the perfect candidate for somewhere like the West Midlands, where a lot of areas are kind of transitioning from Labour to Conservatives, and therefore he's more of a friendly a friendly Tory to maybe reluctant Conservative voters who feel uncomfortable voting Conservative for the first time. And as you say, for mayors, doing stuff like infrastructure, working in the community, even working across party lines is stuff that voters really like. So I think any other Conservative candidate, I don't know if they would have won, probably would have won, but definitely not by the same margin. And yeah, I think it's an impressive victory by him.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that the point just made by Sarah there about will Andy Street go into national politics or will he remain in regional politics? It is a question of how English devolution is going to rank in how people perceive the seniority of politicians to be. Andy Burnham, despite a relatively low turnout in Greater Manchester, did say that this is an endorsement of English devolution, tried to speak directly to the Prime Minister on that front. And of course, in the United States, it's not at all uncommon. I'm thinking Ron DeSantis jumped straight out to me of House, Governor, Senate, run for president. And if not, you can be in the Senate from most states until you're good and ready to leave. So where the likes of the West Midlands mayor, Manchester mayor, Tees Valley mayor ranks in people's minds and in politicians' own sort of ambitions, it matters a lot. And this crop of people who are talented politicians in Andy Street, Ben Hoochin and Andy Burnham, somebody who a lot of people are clamouring to get more involved in national Labour politics, what they do may blaze the trail for how we see these roles in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and just a note on the U.S. point, another example of this would be Andrew Yang, someone no one had heard before, now is very much in line to become the next mayor of America's most important city. But moving on, I think we mentioned this mayorship numerous times, the Tees Valley one, just because it has an impact on that. The current mayor, Ben Hoochin, who was elected in 2017 in a bit of a surprise, smashed through expectations in the last 4 years, and now was reelected with, I believe, nearly 70% of voters in the mid-60s range, of a big realignment of Hartlepool in general, from an area that once upon a time, 10 years ago, was still Labour stronghold to now arguably one could call it a bluish land. I'll go to Aaron first. Thoughts on that Teesside mayoral election?
Well, I mean, if you look at what's happened in Teesside, this isn't a traditional Conservative. I mean, for starters, he's nationalised an airport, which if you think about the current state of the Conservative Party, other than Northern Rail, isn't really a Conservative policy. So I think for starters, that's I think that this is really coming into a new wave of Conservative. I mean, after Thatcher, you had a new wave of very fiscally right Conservatives, and now it's becoming a lot more liberal, especially as more northern regions Conservatives are, gaining traction, like Dehenna Davidson in the Conservative Parliamentary Party. So I think what we're seeing is a very big impact within the north on the Conservative Party, which is almost creating a new style. I think it's a very exciting thing as someone who's very to the centre, maybe marginally slightly right, to see much more of an umbrella group within the Conservative Party that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. Not since the 70s or since Edward Heath, if we're going to be completely honest. Have we seen
the old One Nation Toryism?
Well, One Nation Tory is a Benjamin Disraeli theory, but it's thrown around a lot. Boris Johnson talks about, this is a one nation Conservative government in the election, but it's not really, if we're going to be honest. Maybe so. I mean, David Cameron tried to be a modernizer, even though he was very economically right wing. He tried to make the party more socially left. You can analyze whether that was successful or not. But what we're seeing with this new crop of Conservatives, with Andy Street, with this mayor, it seems to be a lot more of one nationism, an actual embracement of other people's viewpoints and doing the thing that's best for the region. rather than yourself and your own ideology. I mean, if, like I said, if you were to tell any conservative to nationalise anything, he's put the investment in, he's put the work in, the region's benefiting. And I think this is a massive factor, which is very underplayed by a lot of the media, of why Hartlepool was such a drastic turn to the Conservatives. And not only that, why they had so much success in that region. In the people are seeing investment going to conservative areas with Conservative MPs and Conservative councillors and thinking, I want that.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Max?
Yeah, I wasn't following this race particularly closely. It's obviously an incredible mandate that Ben Houchen has got there. But, I mean, sorry, I completely blanked on what I was going to say.
That's fine.
Yeah, maybe come back to me. Hang on one sec.
No problem. Harrison.
Yeah, many of the things that were already said by Aaron and that I said in reference to the West Midlands apply here, except to a completely stratospheric degree. I can't think of a greater personal mandate for an individual in recent British political history. It was an outstanding victory. On the term "One Nation Conservative," and in a field where meaningless terms get thrown around a heck of a lot, "One Nation Conservative" has got to be up there for me. I don't think any of those three words mean anything whatsoever, and so it just is whatever they are. It is whatever they are reacting to at any given point. As I say, I don't really have skin in the politics game, and I certainly am not a fan of the Labour Party. But I would like the Labour Party to return to some semblance of success, so that the Conservative Party can move away from being a left-wing political party, as you say. You have a Conservative mayor nationalising an airport. This is a completely new party, and for a party that has often been resistant to devolution in the past, it's really helped them capitalise on this underlying swing that is occurring across huge swathes of the country right now. And yeah, Ben Houchen, the world's his oyster at the moment, I think.
Sarah?
All I've got to say is shows the realignment of politics, was a very good mandate, and has again shattered that red wall.
Max?
Yeah. What I was really going to say was that the fact that the Tories are in government now, it really, really benefits these Conservative mayors, because these are areas that have been voting Labour for so long, and they've really been stagnant for a long time now, and that's partly because Labour aren't really in government, so they can't actually implement what they want to do in these places. So the people of these constituencies are casting around looking for something new. So they go and they look at the Conservatives and they elect a Conservative. Now the Conservative has a chance to do something, and he is implementing this stuff. And it's kind of almost a vicious cycle of Conservatives able to show that they can do things, whilst Labour in the past have been unable to.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and just because the point, besides the Tees Valley, the other mayorships, and we can maybe get comments on that, were, of course, Manchester. Andy Burnham won an easy re-election again, very much has become an antagonist of the current government, and now maybe soon become a headache for Sir Keir Starmer. In the West England mayorship, the Tories lost the mayorship to, I believe it was the Labour Party, and they also lost the Cambridgeshire mayoral election as well. Quick thoughts on any of those three, or if all three, if anyone wants to chat about it.
I mean, to Jeff for 1 second, I think I completely disagree with what Max just said. And the reason I disagree with him massively is because if you look at a seat, for example, like Wrexham, which is, staunch, has been Labour for generations and generations, the Labour vote has gone down consistently to 1997. This is a seat which you think would be gaining massively and ecstatic over Labour government. Before, when Tony Blair, he got it down, and it didn't stop. Even in 2017, where lots of Labour seats had a massive boost, right, it still went down, which is how it was able to be in a position where Boris Johnson was able to capitalise on it. So I think your reading isn't entirely correct, because let's be honest, lots of people in the north and in red wall seats, it's now been coined. You know, even under a Labour government for 13 years, they still weren't getting what they wanted. And the only reason they arguably voted Labour still in the 2010s was likely due to austerity measures that they weren't happy about. But nevertheless, you had Labour government for 13 years, and most of the time the vote decreased. You had a Conservative government. You'd expect the vote in these areas to increase, and it still didn't. It still went down. If you look at Hartlepool, okay, since '97, the only time it increased was 2017. Right? How? There's no way that it would be. You'd think that some place like that would be decreasing the vote in a Tory government. You'd likely there'd be more wanting a Labour government, so more enthusiastically voting for it.
I just want to make sure you were responding to who again, Aaron?
Max.
Max, you feel free if you would like to respond. Just out of fairness.
Yeah. I think you make a valid point. I guess maybe I didn't explain it wholly clearly, but I guess what I'm saying is they weren't getting what they wanted from Labour, whether that was 20 years ago or even now with Labour MPs. And then the contrast of a Conservative being able to get in and then make a difference where Labour either didn't for whatever reason 20 years ago, or haven't been able to in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I'd just say I think those two things, that all of that can all be true at the same time. There is a colossal underlying trend. We're in a culture war. Brexit happened. These changes are wholesale and they do affect people's voting behaviour. But to be able to sort of capitalise on those underlying trends by actually delivering things that people see, that's also a cherry and icing on the very nice cake that Boris Johnson's baked himself.
That is indeed true. This will actually have a premise on one of our final topics that we mentioned. But I think since this has been occurring as we speak, the Labour shadow cabinet reshuffle is finalized. It has occurred as we have spoken. The main headlines of this reshuffle are that Annalisa Dawes has been sacked as Shadow Chancellor but becomes the party chair. Nick Brown is sacked as Chief Whip. Rachel Reeves, as expected, is now the new Shadow Chancellor. Angela Rayner is now the new Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Alan Campbell is now the Chief Whip. Valerie Vass has been sacked as Leader of the House of Commons. And then Deborani, I may butchered that, is now the new Shadow Leader of the House of Commons. Thoughts on the reshuffle? I'll go first to Sarah.
I know it sounds a little bit cauteless, but I'm not going to lie, I don't really care that much.
Honestly,
if I'm honest, because at the end of the day, Keir Starmer's still going to be in a lot of shit for what's happened in Hartlepool and with the councils, etc. And that's just a basic fact. No amount of reshuffle will face it, because at the end of the day, no one cares about the cabinet. They always care about who's leading it. And that would be true for if it was Jeremy Corbyn, with Boris Johnson, David Cameron. No, I just don't think it necessarily will matter at all, because he was never going to go and bring in all the hard left lot or do like only certain factions. So I just don't think it's going to particularly matter. And yeah, sorry, but you've got to be honest there.
Harrison?
Yeah, I completely agree. That is one of the most vanilla reshuffles I've ever seen in my life. It's nice from the Labour Party perspective to be able to see something like Wes Street get a more prominent role. I think they call him, some people in the press call him the shadow minister for morning TV. He's quite an effective operator in defence of Keir Starmer. Yeah, Fang and Debonair, oh, brilliant. You're in. Valerie Vaz is gone. I don't think it's going to change anyone's mind. I don't think this sense of palpable anger that the Labour Party have let us down and abandoned us is going to even begin to be papered over by the departure of Valerie Vaz and the movement of Annalise Dodds from Shadow Chancellor to chair. Having said that, I would just say that the lack of extended reshuffle and the fact that Annalise Dodds, who's, bless her, I kind of feel sorry for her, but quite well understood to have been a very ineffective Shadow Chancellor, the fact that she actually just hasn't been wholesale binned and that she's still in the fold, it suggests to me that there's been some kind of bottle job from Keir Starmer. It really is unbelievably vanilla. I thought there'd be a scalp somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and it should be noted that ideologically, this is someone would joke, the return of the Labour right to the vote. Aaron.
I'm going to have to go and disagree with both of you here. And I'll explain to you why. Because
I really want to get invested in this, but I'm not sure if I can.
All right, no. Are you ready? Are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? Let's go. So this is one of the most consequential Labour shadow cabinets, arguably, of the last decade. And the reason is because Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer have been in negotiations all day. And this apparently is a consequential win for Angela Rayner. Her allies are in glee over this shadow cabinet. You have, I know what you said, but there are, Angela Dodds arguably politically dead. No one cares about her. No one likes her. No one knows anything about her. Somehow she's the chairman. How? She's arguably one that, you can disagree with John McDonnell or Ed Balls, but they were politically irrelevant. There was a team. You could tell, when you thought of Ed Miliband, you thought about Ed Balls. When it was Brown, you thought about Darling. When you thought about Blair, you knew Brown. Even with Corbyn and McDonnell, who is Dodds? How the hell is she the chairman now? How is she such an inconsequential role? It is politically bewildering. Then, okay, let's go to the rest of this, right? Who are they? Other than the people that are already there, no one knows who they are. How are Labour expecting to win when no one knows who these people are? It's people, not only that, they've fired a lot of MPs, like in where Labour have lost. It's honestly, there are some that are positive, right? You've got more northern representation, for example, which is going to be important. Lisa Nandy wasn't touched, which everyone was kind of expecting it to be. But that's probably solely due to Angela Rayner telling Keir what's what, because Keir has now lost all authority. He is probably the weakest political leader in the major party since John Major. Right, I'd say he's probably even weaker than May. Well, I think this, especially because he's done this so quickly. Right, it's been a year. He's not even in government, and he's lost all authority. I know you guys don't care because you think it doesn't matter because no one pays attention to that. But if you're looking in the realms of the Labour Party, this is probably one of the most incredibly baffling and politically integral parts, because the left in Labour have won this. That is clear.
Well. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No. You.
Okay. No. If you've done a good job of engaging, and I think that point that I think you led with and finished with about Angela Rayner is probably the most salient one. Keir Starmer wants to be Tony Blair. I think he's Ian Duncan Smith. He will be there for a very short period of time. To be this early in leadership, even the fact that you're sat there negotiating with your deputy leader is such a terrible look. In some ways, Rayner's position is naturally strong, almost comparable in some way to the Vice President of the United States, and that she's the only person in the leadership of the party substituting government that the person at the top can't fire. So, yes, she has that strength. However, she is nicely positioned between these two core factions, the slightly more moderate and definitely on the left. She's got a sort of finger in both pies there, but I think this got to be the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer.
And she very much likely has that knife ready to go when it's time to because it's pretty clear Rayner is an ambitious person who probably wants a top job down the road.
Oh, I think she's going to get it at some point.
Well, the rumor, and I cannot say this is complete fact. Okay, so we have to have that caveat. But what I've heard is that she wanted to go as leader and that apparently there were personal issues that meant that she only went for deputy. So that could be why he hasn't gone for leader. But I definitely think that Keir Starmer has started a war, and we knew. I put this quote into the chat. He started a war he isn't going to win, and really, utterly, he's already lost.
Game of Thrones, there's nothing on there.
Max, let's get you involved.
Yeah. It is. I mean, from the outside, it seems completely boring. I mean, I imagine what Starmer was going for was something of, oh look, we did a reshuffle, we're making changes. Gets that headline, people see, oh look, he's doing something. Maybe they're going to improve, without really ever looking at it. Looking at the names that have changed, it really doesn't matter. You still got the few big hitters in there, John Ashworth, David Lammy, who there really aren't that many in here, to be honest. But yeah, I agree entirely with the point about Annalise Dodds. I don't know anything about her. She's been anonymous since she's been in the post, and it's a strange one that she's still in a prominent position in the cabinet. The stuff you're saying about Angela Rayner, again, yeah, it wholly weakens Starmer's position even after this relatively poor election for him. Yeah, I don't know if you can call this a complete victory for the Labour left, because I mean there's still plenty of moderates floating around in there, and I mean Starmer is still the leader of the party. He still largely has he has some semblance of control by the very fact that he is the leader. But he is waning, and I imagine he will not make it to the next election.
And it should be noted, Labour has another headache about to come up because they won the West Yorkshire mayor election. That means there will be an open by-election at the Baton and Span constituency, which is a 6% Labour majority, which very much could be a type of seat Labour could lose. And if they lose that, Keir, watch out.
Yeah. Surely you're thinking he's a goner if they lose Batley and Spen. That's a slightly better for the Labour Party than lots of these more Brexity red wall seats. It's the seat, unfortunately, Joe Cox, the MP who was murdered, was representing. And I think just a point that Max made there was a really excellent one, which is that Keir Starmer wanted to do this reshuffle, however consequential, just to get a little news cycle, couple of days. He did the reshuffle. He's listening to you, people. He's made changes, and that is not gone well, because all the headlines are going to be, I don't know, pictures of Angela Rayner's face photoshopped onto Joseph Stalin uniforms in local tabloids or something. You know, she has taken control, at least in a de facto sense, of the leadership of the Labour
We could
Party.
always have the infamous, what is it? The one with, it's Keir in the pocket, and it's her looking over it, like the old salmon with Ed Miliband thing.
I mean, Keir Starmer, this kind of reminds me of a bit of Gordon Brown when he said he was going to call the election and then didn't, and then everyone despised him. At that point, he became the least popular prime minister in history. And Keir Starmer, to be fair to him, at some point in January, it looked like potentially he could destroy the Tories. But, the vaccine helped the Tories getting a bit of, positivity. But right now he took a risk, and he's been royally bitten. And to talk about Batley and there's a whole massive dynamic to the seat, which most people aren't talking about, which is that there was an independent who got 25% in the seat. Where are people going to go with that? But more importantly, looking at the elections that happened this weekend, if you look at the wards in Batley and Spen, the Conservatives won. not by a lot, by a couple, by a percent,
narrow, yeah.
But still, that with the continuation of the boost of the vaccine, that's going to happen with, people's opinions. And not only that, we've got the 17th of May where more restrictions will be lifted, and potentially, depending on when it's actually organised for. Because let's not forget, there are still this is the third by-election. We've got one in Scotland and Airdrie and Shorts, Chesham and Manisham. This could be potentially after everything opens up, where it's likely, without any, major issues, Boris Johnson will probably be at his peak.
Yes, and he could very well win 2 of those by-elections, with the one in England being a safe Tory seat if the late Tory MP passed away. But of course, it's a very good result so far. And of course, as mentioned, if Sir Keir loses that Batley and Span by-election, he's going to be under immense pressure then of losing 2 seats in 1 year. For someone who said he would fix Labour's problems going backwards is not a great sign in the political headwinds that it is being opposition leader. Let's see. What was I going to ask? Finally, I think our last point, which is the council elections. Those occurred. Always fun to see, the fun council results. Interestingly, we had a very big regional divide. The Tories did very well in the north, but did very mediocre in the south, with some of their historic council areas going very badly, losing a pair of seats in Surrey, losing control of Oxfordshire and Hertfordshire councils, other things. So quick thoughts on the regionalisation of these trends of the Tories doing well in the north, but not doing that great in the south, albeit Labour didn't do as great in here. It was mostly the Lib Dems and Greens.
If I may start, I think that the narrative that the Conservatives are terrible or bad in the south is a very simple narrative, but I don't think really rings true. I mean, let's say for one moment they gained Harlow from Labour control, right? Which is an area which I don't know the history of the council, but doesn't tend to go Conservative councilling for a very long time. So that's yes, for sure, Conservatives did lose big in places like Kent and Cambridgeshire and Oxfordshire, but there's a lot of other places like in Havant and Fareham and Southampton, which they gained also from Labour. These are massive places. There are 2 seats that are predominantly Southampton. One of them is very marginally Conservative. Generally, it flips between. One of them is generally safe Labour. They just took the council. That could be at risk at the next general election if that comes to fruition throughout the next term. So let's stay guarded on that narrative. I think the 2 of the biggest, happiest people here are going to be the Green Party, obviously, and the Lib Dems, who I spoke to a Lib Dem who's somewhat prominent online. He's expected to use 150 councillors, and they went positive. So Ed Davey, he's done well, but we know for a fact that local elections with the Lib Dems doesn't always transfer. Key example, Watford is a Lib Dem control, but they are nowhere in the general election.
Harrison?
Yeah, it's Harlow. I have a lot of connections to Harlow. It's known as the home of the white van man. Yeah, that's again just part of this general realignment. And I think just to pick up on what Aaron said there is that Brexit supporting working class areas, which are very traditionally loyal to the Labour Party, are not just the purview of the North. It's really important to know that Brexit and the realignment that's partly a necessary implication of it is not a North versus South thing. It's a sort of London, fashionable cities, those fashionable cities, leafy suburbs, and next to everywhere else. And then obviously you've got Scotland and Northern Ireland dynamics at play there as well. But I mean, in England and Wales anyway.
Northern Ireland could have its realignment next year, arguably.
Yeah, that's going to be Max will know a lot more about that than me, but I'm not looking forward to that at all. You think Scotland's bad? We're going through a lot of people and a lot of columnists in Scotland are calling it an Ulsterisation of Scottish politics. and we're like on step one of that. So yeah, it's going to be seminal in Northern Ireland.
Sarah, thoughts on the regional divide of the councils, or any thoughts on the councils at all?
Well, obviously, I'm going to go for an anecdotal one. In Grimsby, the Conservatives did incredibly well. They did not lose a single seat, I believe. They won several that have not been traditionally Conservative. I was at the polling station for a couple of hours with our MP and the candidates. And my ward is traditionally quite Conservative, so it wasn't too much of a surprise that safely re-elected. But I mean, even 10, 15 years ago, the idea of Grimsby having a Conservative MP and council would have been astounding. And I think it's a very typical tale of Conservatives' recent success. White, working class northern seaside town with high unemployment, low education. Generally, I think some of the areas are some of the most deprived in Britain. And that's really shown how the Conservatives have come through and how Labour hasn't. I mean, Conservatives have won in Sunderland and Derbyshire, places that you would never quite imagine. And I mean, yeah, they didn't do brilliantly in the South. They maintained it, but it's even more sort of a contrast between sort of muddling along in the South in traditional Tory areas than actually stomping it in some places in the North.
And it should be argued by some that if the Tories, played this level up agenda more, as they say, equal regionalized, they could keep their coalition very happy between North and South. They just, use maybe more leveling up for the South while keeping it in the North. But one could argue that maybe this narrative of them losing the blue wall, which really blue wall, red walls are horrible terms that probably should be phased out and probably used by something more academically more inclined in this sense. They do have the chance. Obviously, realignment has occurred, but there's still an argument to be made if the Tories can make their new northern friends happy and keep their southern friends happy. That's a recipe for staying in power for as ever long they may need to do it. And I think they can win with a leveling up narrative for both groups if they do the narrative right. It's not as if I don't think a voter in Surrey and a voter up in the north don't have some of the same priorities in life as well. They just may have a different mindset of getting there. Max, thoughts on the councils? And you can add your thoughts about next year's Northern Ireland election since it was touched, and that is your neck of the woods.
Of course. Yeah, on England, I think most of the points have really been made. I think one thing I slightly noticed, I think Labour need to be careful not to generalise that they've lost the whole of the north, because they still maintain their seats in Manchester, Blackburn, Salford, Leeds. They gained 6 in Sefton, gained a couple somewhere else, I can't remember where it was. But obviously, the likes of Durham and Hartlepool are just disasters. You look at touching on the Greens, they obviously did unsurprisingly well, I guess, building on 2019. That result from Bristol today, maybe not wholly unexpected, but very, very strong from them. Also taking the Sheffield Council away from Labour, and I gained 6 in Suffolk, bizarrely. Don't really know why that happened. To comment on Northern Ireland quickly, it's hard to tell exactly how it's going to realign right now because so much is up in the air. With DUP are electing their new leader right now, the UUP have just ditched their leader, so neither of the main unionist parties have a leader right now, and we don't know really which direction either of them are going in. If the if the Ulster Unionists can bring in a strong leader. They're talking about Doug Beattie at the moment, who's a pretty strong candidate who they've been pushing for a while. They could stem that flow from DUP to Alliance, instead divert those votes from DUP to UUP, which, it's been going in the other direction pretty much for 20 years now, UUP into DUP, but to the point where the UUP are just in their heartlands, and that's about it. So I didn't expect the Ulster Unionists, the UUP, to be have any strength next year. I was expecting them to lose more seats, but now if they can bring a strong leader and run a strong campaign, the Health Minister in Northern Ireland is the UUP, Robin Swan, and he's done a pretty good job by all accounts, and he's incredibly popular. I'd see them maybe they'll have a stronger election. That's bad news again for the DUP because they will, if the UUP are on the up, they'll be facing both the Alliance Party and the UUP on the up, and possibly the TUV from their right as well. There's a real risk of them getting absolutely slaughtered. On the nationalist side, the SDLP have a very, very strong leadership group, but it hasn't really translated into support. They had two very, very good wins in Westminster last time, but outside of that, they're kind of just flat. And Sinn Féin will lose some votes. They'll probably lose some seats. They had a big scandal last year about the big funeral up in, I think it was Belfast, where there were a bunch of COVID protocols to attend an IRA bigwig's funeral, which was not a good look for them. But there's definitely potential for the DUP to be dropped down to third or fourth largest party. Sinn Féin may struggle somewhat, and we will almost certainly see the Alliance make big gains. And now with the UUP changing leader, they may make some gains as well.
But since we're getting to the end, each and one of you have a closing thought on anything we've covered or anything we didn't cover. And I'll go right on my screen first, so I'll let Harrison go first.
I think the union is in an extremely precarious place as a result of last night, but not quite as precarious as that of the Labour Party, who risk, in spite of their inherent structural strength, which would prevent them being supplanted for second place anytime soon, preventing some kind of realignment. They risk oblivion if they can't arrest their downslide with some important part of the electorate. And I think, by all intents and purposes, Keir Starmer may not be the man to do that.
Sarah.
Well, once again, thank you for having me. It's been really fun, and it's always nice to discuss with different perspectives and different people. And I hope it's got people thinking, especially non-Brits who might know as much. I just think that it's been generally very successful, the Conservatives, not so well for Labour, apart from in Wales, and that minor parties like the Lib Dems and the Greens have done well. I don't think there were any major shocks. I thought, Hartlepool was going to be Conservative, Sadiq Khan was going to win again. So there were no major surprises. It wasn't exciting in the sense that, oh my God, I can't believe so-and-so's won. I think it was just big purely because obviously they were delayed by a year and we're in such unusual times.
Indeed. Aaron.
I think that this has probably been, in contrast to what I think this is. I think the reason I think it's shocking is because we've seen countless times 20 plus games vote to take a seat or council or whatever, that we've seen the Green Party or the Lib Dems making 30 to 50% rising in their votes share to take councils, which I think is absolutely ordinary in the political sphere. I think that in an ordinary time, this result doesn't happen, and we see Labour making gains in the Conservatives. I think it just shows that right now, Labour are really looking like they did back in the 80s. They haven't really got a extreme talent pool where people are excited about a specific member. And the only member really anyone's excited about is Andy Burnham, who probably won't return to Westminster politics. And arguably Lisa Nandy, who's popular among Labour vote, strong Labour people, but we haven't really seen that translate into mainstream popularity, considering two not so great interviews on Mar, etc. So I think right now Labour need a complete haul of personnel, or that they could be absolute.
And finally, Max, on your end?
Yeah, I'd just say echo all of those thoughts and really add that Labour just have to be careful not to be undermined by the left and by the Lib Dems and the Greens, because that is really their strong activist base, which they need, whilst also they're under attack from the right. So they've got a really, really difficult balancing act. I think the one way that they may break through, Boris Johnson has positioned himself as defender of the union. If the union falls and Scotland leaves, Boris Johnson's in a difficult position, and if Labour can get themselves in a decent position as a party, which remains to be seen, then maybe they can capitalise in 3 years down the road if that happens.
And my, as the host, final thoughts are: I think too many people are still thinking of British politics prior to the realignment that Brexit was a symptom of. The British politics is not the traditional left-right axis, and it really the parties are not the same. The Conservative Party is not this Thatcherite party it once upon a time ran around with. It's shifted. But that also means Labour has to shift as well. Labour is very much still stuck in the past of thinking it's a workers' party, that very much the worker must vote for Labour, when they don't realize many of their former friends are now deserting them left and right. And I think Labour leadership needs to fix itself, or Sir Keir, as mentioned, will become Labour's IDS, which is gets elected and will be booted out in the halls of power. That is, of course, my final thoughts. I again want to thank all four of you for taking time out of your day to come and discuss your country's politics. It's always fun to hear different perspectives as a balanced panel. For those in our audience, thank you for watching. If you'd like to watch more of this, please follow us on Twitter at Elections Daily. And if you want to find our podcasts, they're on every podcast servicing you can find. And thank you again. And if you can legally do this, wherever you're watching from, get vaccinated. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, and see you again.